Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. James T. Lane.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun, let us march on till victory is won.
There are many black women who deserve to have their names on military bases instead of Confederate generals, like Mary Tuvestray. Mary was an enslaved black woman with a talent for drawing. One day during the Civil War, she happened to see a drawing of the Confederacy's plans for a new warship. So she pulled out some tissue paper from her dress, traced the plans, walked to D.C. and handed them to the Navy's chief admiral. And when she did, she changed the course of history, because that wasn't just any ship. Those were plans for the first ever ironclad ship. It's the reason why the Union Navy dominated the seas and why America's Navy is so revered today. But there is no Fort Tuvestray. Instead, we have Fort Beauregard, named after Confederate General Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard, who was a traitor and a losing-ass bitch. You know who else should have a base named after them? William Cathay. William was a freed slave who wanted to serve his country, so he joined the army, rose through the ranks, and ended up serving with the famous Buffalo Soldiers. Then William fell ill and checked into an army hospital, where it was discovered that he was actually a woman, Cathay Williams. Cathay had disguised herself as a man so she could fight for her country, something that many black women of that time period did. Cathay should have a base named after her, but instead of Fort Williams, we have Fort Pickett, named after Confederate General George Pickett, who fled to Canada after the South lost the war. So he was a coward and a traitor and a losing-ass bitch. Now, FDR didn't care too much for black people, but he made an exception. Eleanor Roosevelt's friend, Mary McLeod Bethune. Mary could have an audience with FDR at any time, and she convinced him to slide an amendment into a bill that gave funding to HBCUs. When the U.S. was preparing for war, the Army didn't have enough pilots, so Mary convinced the First Lady to tour HBCUs where students were learning to fly. At one stop, Eleanor went for a plane ride with a black pilot, and that's what convinced the public that black men could fly planes. Which means Mary single-handedly paved the way for the Tuskegee Airmen. Oh, to walk the grounds at Camp Bethune. But instead we have Fort Hood, named after Confederate General John Bell Hood, who was a traitor and a losing-ass bitch. And also extremely ugly. Look at him. He looks like a melting Jake Gyllenhaal. Next up, Araminta Ross. Araminta Ross was a famous tour guide until the government of Massachusetts begged her to help the Union in the Civil War. She led the expeditionary forces on raids, trained soldiers, and had such a profound effect that the general in charge of South Carolina told his troops to free any slaves they came across. Now that made Abraham Lincoln furious until slaves started joining the Union Army. It not only gave the Union an advantage, it led to the Emancipation Proclamation. Araminta even got a pension, but it wasn't under her birth name, it was under her new name. You're gonna flip. Harriet Tubman! Yay! Fort Tubman. It has a nice ring to it. But instead, we have Fort Benning, which sounds like trash because it is trash, because it's named after Confederate General Henry Benning, who was trash. He said, "By the time the North shall have attained the power, the black race will be in a large majority, and then we will have black governors, black legislatures, black juries, black everything. Is it to be supposed that the white race will stand for that? Well, have a seat, bitch, because it's happening." In 1912, 2 black teenagers were accused of rape. They were tried, convicted, and sentenced to death in a single day. And after they were executed, a mob of white men terrorized, drove out, or killed all the black people in the surrounding area. And they did that until the entire black community of Oscarville disappeared. The county went from having over 1,000 black residents in 1912 to 0 in 1920. That story is so sad, it makes this story look like a comedy. After the black community had been run off, the white people of Forsyth County said, "You know what we could use? A big old lake." So they made one, right where the town of Oscarville had just been. They flooded the area and literally covered up the entire town with water. This is what it looks like right now. But the town is still under there. The homes and churches and schools, they're still down there. And now people go boating on top of them. Compared to that, this is truly a rom-com. Now, you might be thinking, what a weird, isolated incident. But just like the rat who ate the pizza in the subway, this story is both crazy and common. Ever heard of Collegia, Alabama? It was once a thriving black community with a black college, the first black railroad, and literally hundreds of family homes. Today, it's Lake Martin. At least they had the decency to name it after a black person. And if you think this kind of thing only happened in the South, let me introduce you to a place called Central Park. It's named after that coffee shop on Friends. Central Park used to have a black community in it called York Hill. But the city of New York destroyed York Hill so that they could build the Central Park Reservoir. Because if there's one thing New York needs, it's another place for ducks to hang out. But if you come here, don't try and feed those ducks. They are very aggressive. Mess around and lose a finger. Now, when the residents of York Hill were kicked out of their homes, they fled to another black community nearby called Seneca Village. And then a few years later, New York destroyed Seneca Village too, so that they could build Central Park on top of it. The craziest part of this story is that I work a few blocks away from a place where the government disappeared 2 black communities. And until recently, I didn't know about any of it. You know why? Because it worked. They tried to erase black communities and they came way too close. But now there are people doing the research. So we are finally learning about places like Henry and McKee Islands, which is now located under Lake Guntersville in Alabama, and Vanport, Oregon, which is now located under Delta Park. And all of these towns, which are currently literally underwater. Hey, wait, hold on. What was that last one? Old Neversink. That's a real place. Well, if we've learned one thing today, it's never assume something is unsinkable. Black people aren't usually known for being anti-vaccine, but a lot of us are anti-taking the vaccine first because there is a long history of doctors experimenting on black people to figure out ways to help white people. For example, many of the practices in modern-day gynecology come from experimenting on slaves. The gynecologist is not fun in 2021, so you know the very first speculum was bad. But even after slavery ended, scientists were taught that black bodies and minds were inferior, and because of this, that their bodies belonged to science, even if it was against their will. Now, I didn't say they thought black minds and bodies were inferior. I said they were taught this. It was part of their curriculum. It came between how to turn on a Bunsen burner and how to get stains out of your lab coat. In 1932, the United States Public Health Service conducted the Tuskegee Study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. Scientists from the U.S. government decided they wanted to see what happens to black men when syphilis is left untreated. This is what our government decided to focus on in 1932. Gerald, should we solve the Great Depression? We could, or hear me out, we could conduct this insane experiment. Now, what human being would just sign up to let syphilis kill them? The answer is No damn body. So they got 600 black men to participate in that study by lying to them. The men thought they were being treated, and instead the government gave them fake medicine and just let them die, which may sound unbelievable, but take a look around America today. Letting people die is kind of our government's thing.